Imagine the boardroom of a major US airline in 2013. They've spent millions lobbying Washington, securing their fortress over the Atlantic. No Gulf carrier can touch their most profitable routes. Then a single flight appears on the departure boards, Emirates flying from New York to Milan. How did their biggest rival get inside the walls without firing a shot? What ancient rule did they uncover that no one else saw? And was this the start of a quiet invasion of America's skies? Here's what really happened. You see, for decades, the skies over the United States were a fortress, and the transatlantic market was its crown jewel. On the surface, America championed a policy of open skies, a series of agreements with over 130 countries designed to promote competition and free trade in the air. But in reality, this openness was a carefully managed illusion. The system was a labyrinth of slot controls, bilateral limits, and immense political pressure, all designed to protect the domestic giants, Delta, United, and American Airlines. These carriers weren't just airlines, they were national champions, and Washington treated them as such. They controlled a staggering 48% of the transatlantic market, a multi-billion-dollar empire built on routes connecting Europe and North America. This was their territory, and they defended it fiercely. In the early 2010s, a new threat emerged from the east. The Gulf carriers, Emirates, Qatar, and Etihad, were expanding at a terrifying pace, backed by what US airlines claimed were unfair advantages. A powerful lobbying group, the Partnership for Open and Fair Skies, was formed. They launched a multi-million-dollar campaign, accusing the Gulf carriers of receiving over $42 billion in illegal government subsidies that distorted competition and threatened American jobs. The message was clear: the Gulf carriers were playing dirty, and they had to be stopped. The lobbying was relentless, the pressure on Washington immense. By 2013, the American carriers believed they had succeeded. They had fortified the walls, closed every legal pathway, and ensured that Emirates' expansion into the US was effectively blocked. The fortress was secure, but they overlooked one tiny detail: a crack in the wall. And through that crack, Emirates was about to drive a super jumbo jet. They were about to do something that looked completely impossible. What the American carriers saw as a political battle, Emirates saw as a legal puzzle. And they found the missing piece buried in the dusty archives of international aviation law. The answer wasn't in lobbying or backroom deals, it was in a set of rules known as the freedoms of the air, specifically the fifth freedom. This obscure but powerful clause allows an airline from one country to carry passengers between two different foreign countries, as long as the flight originates or terminates in its home country. It's like a bus route. The bus starts at its home depot, but it's allowed to pick up and drop off passengers at stops that are not its home base. For Emirates, this meant they could fly from Dubai to a city in Europe, and then sell tickets for a second leg of that same flight from that European city to the United States. They didn't need new permission from the US for the Milan to New York leg, because the permission was already there. Hidden in old treaties, this wasn't a new rule, it was a principle of international law that had existed for decades. Emirates' legal team had unearthed two critical agreements: a 1991 Open Skies Treaty between Italy and the US, and a similar 2002 treaty between Greece and the US. These documents, written long before Emirates was a global superpower, granted the rights they needed. So, in 2013, Emirates launched Flight EK205, Dubai to Milan to New York. In 2017, they did it again with a flight from Dubai to Athens to New York. Suddenly, Emirates was competing directly with Delta and United on some of their most prized routes. The American carriers were stunned. They had spent years fighting a war on the wrong front. While they were busy lobbying Congress, Emirates was quietly reading the fine print. By 2025, these two routes alone were carrying 150,000 passengers annually and generating an estimated $200 million in pure profit for the Dubai-based airline. The system designed to protect US carriers had just become their own trap. But how could this be possible? If the loophole was so simple, why hadn't anyone else used it? The truth is, it wasn't just about finding the rule, it was about having the audacity to use it, and the American carriers were about to find out just how audacious their rival was. The reaction from the US aviation industry was nothing short of explosive. It was a mix of pure outrage and disbelief. CEOs of the major US airlines, who had just declared victory in their campaign to contain the Gulf carriers, were blindsided. They immediately accused Emirates of dumping capacity, flooding the market with cheap seats to drive out competition, and of exploiting loopholes in a way that violated the spirit, if not the letter, of the Open Skies Agreements. The lobbying machine roared back to life, but this time with a desperate, frantic energy. Led by Delta and United, the US carriers spent an estimated $25 million on a renewed campaign to shut down these Fifth Freedom flights. They painted Emirates as a predator, a state-subsidized behemoth using its deep pockets to wage an unfair war on American businesses. They took their case to the media, to the public, and most importantly, to Washington. They demanded that regulators step in and protect them. But here's where the genius of Emirates' strategy became undeniable. They hadn't broken a single rule. When the Department of Transportation launched a review of the routes in 2018, their investigators came back with a frustrating conclusion. The flights were perfectly legal. They were explicitly permitted under the existing bilateral treaties. Emirates wasn't exploiting a loophole. They were exercising a contractual right that had been granted decades earlier. There was no violation to punish, no rule to enforce. The hands of the regulators were tied. Emirates had played the game better than its creators. They used America's own commitment to free market principles and legally binding treaties against it. The backlash, for all its noise and fury, achieved nothing. The flights continued, and the US carriers were forced to watch as their rival siphoned away their customers. By 2025, Emirates' legal precision had cost the American airlines an estimated 2% of their market share on transatlantic routes. The fortress had been breached, and its defenders were powerless to stop the invasion. But this was never just about one or two routes, it was about something much bigger. It was a calculated move to establish a powerful presence in the heart of enemy territory. Why was this one route, Milan to New York, so incredibly powerful? Because it was never just about moving passengers from point A to point B. It was a masterstroke of branding, strategy, and economic warfare. Each time an Emirates A380, with its 510 seats, thundered down the runway at JFK, it was an advertisement in the sky. It was a symbol of global reach, luxury, and defiance, operating daily in America's own backyard. These weren't just any routes, they were premium-heavy corridors. The Milan-New York and Athens-New York flights were magnets for high-paying customers. An incredible 30% of the traffic was in first and business class, the most lucrative segment of the market. This premium traffic alone generated an estimated $350 million in revenue annually for Emirates. This was money taken directly from the pockets of their American and European rivals. The A380, with its famous onboard bar and showers, became a flying billboard for an experience that US carriers simply couldn't match. But the strategy was even more clever than that. The routes acted as powerful funnels. They didn't just serve the New York market, they fed passengers into Emirates' global network. Around 20% of the passengers on these flights didn't end their journey in Dubai. They connected onward to destinations across the Middle East, Africa, and Asia. This created a secondary revenue stream worth an estimated $150 million, solidifying Dubai's position as the world's preeminent travel hub. The flights blurred the line between foreign and domestic competition in a way no one had ever seen before. For American travelers, Emirates was no longer a distant, exotic airline. It was an option right there on the departure board at JFK, flying a route they knew well. It was a direct, head-to-head challenge, and it was working. The question wasn't just how they did it, but what this audacious move meant for the airline's grander ambitions. This wasn't a gamble, it was a calculated invasion of the world's most valuable aviation market. The Fifth Freedom routes gave Emirates what money and lobbying couldn't buy: a permanent, strategic foothold in the United States, all without needing to engage in costly alliances or joint ventures that American carriers relied on. It allowed them to build a 5% share of the US market, seemingly overnight, on their own terms. The brilliance was in its efficiency. Instead of negotiating complex new bilateral agreements with the US government, a process that can take years of diplomacy and cost between $10 and $20 million in legal fees, Emirates simply activated dormant clauses in old treaties. While their competitors were fighting for approvals, Emirates was already flying, capturing passengers, earning revenue, and building its brand. The European stopovers in Milan and Athens were transformed into tactical mini-hubs. From these two cities, Emirates could feed passengers from all over Europe into its 10 US destinations, operating 25 weekly flights that were now more full and more profitable. This move fundamentally changed how the world saw Emirates. It wasn't just a powerful Gulf carrier anymore. It was a global player capable of competing with anyone, anywhere. The brand's visibility in the US skyrocketed, growing by an estimated 15% since 2013, according to YouGov polling. They had outsmarted the smartest players in the game, not with brute force, but with intelligence and a deep understanding of the rules. They had turned the complex web of international aviation law from a barrier into a weapon. The strategic stakes were enormous. This wasn't just about winning a few routes, it was about demonstrating a new way to conquer the globe, and in this high-stakes game, there were clear winners and losers. The fallout from this strategic masterclass created a clear divide. The biggest winner, without a doubt, was Emirates. The airline turned a few lines of text in an old treaty into a $500 million revenue stream. They had not only established a beachhead in the lucrative transatlantic market, but had also burnished their reputation as one of the most cunning and innovative airlines in the world. But they weren't the only ones who benefited. Passengers won too. The introduction of a powerful new competitor on these routes led to increased capacity and lower prices, with average fares on the transatlantic corridor dropping by as much as 10%. The European airports of Milan and Athens also came out ahead, gaining an influx of an additional 200,000 passengers annually, which translated into more landing fees, more retail spending, and greater global connectivity. The losers were just as clear. The US legacy carriers were humiliated and outmaneuvered. They lost an estimated $300 million in high-value premium traffic and suffered a blow to their market dominance that they had spent decades building. They had poured fortunes into lobbying, only to be defeated by a strategy they never saw coming. US regulators were also left looking flat-footed, their authority undermined by the very treaties they were supposed to uphold. The ultimate irony was breathtaking. The open skies policies, championed by the US as a way to promote American-style free market competition, had become the very tool a foreign rival used to hand them one of their most significant defeats. It was a lesson in how the rules of the game can be turned against their creators. But this story is bigger than just one airline or one country. It's a glimpse into the future of global aviation. Emirates' Fifth Freedom Gambit wasn't an isolated incident. It was a sign of a broader shift in global power, a case study in a new form of aviation diplomacy where influence is wielded not through ownership or brute force, but through network intelligence and a deep understanding of the law. It became a playbook for how ambitious airlines could expand globally, infiltrating protected markets without buying a single share in a rival or merging with another company. This strategy has echoes elsewhere. Look at Turkish Airlines, which used its 30% minority stake in Air Albania to legally access the highly regulated European Union market, effectively using a small investment as a key to unlock a continent. It's the same principle, finding the legal side door when the front gate is locked. With 60% of all global air traffic still governed by a patchwork of over 3,000 different bilateral agreements, the opportunities for this kind of legal maneuvering are immense. These aging treaties, written for a different era of aviation, are a minefield of forgotten clauses and hidden opportunities. The Emirates story forces us to ask a bigger question. As these treaties age and the balance of power in aviation shifts, who will find the next freedom hack? What other billion-dollar markets are waiting to be unlocked by an airline with a sharp legal team and the courage to make a move that everyone else thinks is impossible? Is this the future of global competition? A world where the most successful airlines are not the biggest, but the smartest? Or was Emirates' move a dangerous exploitation of the system that threatens to unravel the cooperative framework that holds global aviation together? The legacy of that single flight from Milan to New York is still being written. It proved that sometimes the most powerful weapon in a high-stakes battle isn't a new airplane or a bigger budget. It's a line of text forgotten by everyone except the one person who realized it was the key to everything. Click here to check out another one of our videos.